The 7-foot giant's shadow swallowed Clara whole as she stepped off the stagecoach, her 95-pound frame trembling like a leaf in a Wyoming windstorm. "You're too small," Jonas McCall's deep voice rumbled, his massive hands clenching at his sides. "But I'll make it fit." Those words meant to reassure sent ice through her veins. She'd fled Boston to escape one monster, only to be married by proxy to another. Dear viewers, stay with me through this extraordinary tale of impossible love and comment. Your city below. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt against the dusty main street of Ember Ridge, Wyoming, sending a cloud of amber dust spiraling into the afternoon sun. Clara Whitfield pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. Through the haze she saw him, a figure so massive he made the other men look like children playing dress-up in their father's clothes. Jonas McCall stood beside the hitching post, his broad-brimmed hat casting shadows across features she couldn't quite make out. But she didn't need to see his face to understand the sheer impossibility of what awaited her. He was a mountain of a man, 7 feet of muscle and bone wrapped in worn leather and denim, his shoulders so wide they blocked out the storefront behind him. "Ma'am?" The driver's voice cracked through her paralysis. "This is your stop." Clara's hands trembled as she gathered her single carpet bag, the sum total of her life condensed into worn fabric and brass clasps. The other passengers, a preacher's wife and 2 traveling salesmen, watched her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They knew. Everyone on this coach had heard the whispers at the last station about the tiny Boston bride and her giant groom. "Courage," she whispered to herself, the word her mother had spoken on her deathbed. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Clara. It's moving forward despite it." She descended the coach steps, each one feeling like a leap into an abyss. The moment her button boots touched Wyoming soil, she felt the weight of every decision that had brought her here, fleeing her uncle's house in the dead of night, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride, signing proxy marriage papers to a man she'd never met. Anything had seemed better than what waited for her in Boston. Anything. Now she wasn't so sure. Jonas McCall moved toward her with surprising grace. For someone his size, each step measured and careful, as if he were approaching a spooked horse. As he drew closer, Clara had to crane her neck back to look up at his face. The sun behind him turned him into a silhouette, a dark giant against the blazing sky. "Mrs. McCall." His voice was deep as a canyon, but there was something else there, uncertainty, perhaps even fear, that matched her own. "Clara." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. This close, she could see the worn leather of his boots, each one the size of 2 of hers placed end to end. His hands hanging at his sides could encompass her entire waist. One wrong move, one moment of anger, and he could snap her like kindling. "You're smaller than I expected," he said, then immediately winced. "I mean, your letters didn't mention—" He stopped, pulled off his hat, and ran a massive hand through dark hair. "Hell, I'm making a mess of this already." Despite her terror, Clara found her voice. "I'm exactly as large as I need to be, Mr. McCall." A smile ghosted across his features. She could see his face now weathered by sun and wind, with surprisingly gentle brown eyes behind the rugged exterior. "Jonas," he corrected. "And you're right. I apologize." He gestured to her bag. "May I—" She hesitated, then nodded. He lifted the carpet bag with 2 fingers as if it weighed nothing at all. The casual display of strength sent another shiver through her. "The preacher's waiting at the church," Jonas said, then caught her expression. "Unless you'd prefer to rest first. The ceremony can wait." "The ceremony us," Clara's voice pitched high. "But we were married by proxy. The papers were legal, yes." Jonas shifted uncomfortably, the movement making him seem even larger. "But Reverend Matthews insists on blessing the union in person. Says it's only proper given the unusual circumstances." Unusual. Clara almost laughed at the understatement. Everything about this was unusual. A Boston socialite fleeing to the frontier, marrying a stranger, sight unseen standing in the dusty street beside a man who could use her for a toothpick. "The whole town's gathered," Jonas continued, and now she detected a note of apology in his tone. I tried to keep it quiet, but Ember Ridge doesn't get much entertainment. They're curious. About the freak show, Clara said before she could stop herself. Jonas's jaw tightened. About us, he corrected gently. But if you're not ready, no. Clara straightened her spine, all 5 feet of it. Let them look. Let them see that Clara Whitfield, Clara McCall, doesn't run from whispers and stares. Something shifted in Jonas's expression, a warmth that transformed his intimidating features. You've got spine. Good. You'll need it out here. They walked through town together, an odd procession that drew every eye in Ember Ridge. Clara heard the whispers following in their wake like tumbleweeds. Lord Almighty, she barely reaches his elbow. How's that supposed to work exactly? Poor little thing, she has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Jonas's jaw grew tighter with each comment, but he said nothing, just adjusted his long stride to match her quick steps. Clara noticed he positioned himself between her and the gawkers, using his body as a shield. The church sat at the end of Main Street, its white paint peeling in the harsh Wyoming sun. True to Jonas's word, it seemed the entire town had squeezed inside. The moment they entered, a hush fell over the congregation like a blanket of snow. Reverend Matthews, a thin man with spectacles perched on a beaky nose, gestured them forward. Ah, the happy couple. Happy. Clara wondered if the Reverend was blind or simply had a peculiar sense of humor. As they stood before the altar, the contrast between them became even more pronounced. Jonas had to stoop slightly to fit beneath the church's modest ceiling, while Clara barely reached the bottom of his rib cage. The Reverend cleared his throat, clearly unsettled by the sight. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to bless the union of Jonas McCall and Clara. He paused, squinting at his notes. Whitfield. Though they have been joined in law, we gather to join them in the eyes of God and this community. Clara heard someone in the back whisper, God help her on the wedding night. Heat flooded her cheeks, but before she could react, Jonas spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. Anyone who has something to say about my wife can say it to me. Now. Or they can hold their peace like the good book says. The church fell silent as a tomb. Reverend Matthews hurried through the blessing, his nervous energy making the words blur together. When he reached the part about kissing the bride, he hesitated. You may, that is, a kiss of peace would be... Jonas looked down at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, her heart thundering. He bent and bent and bent until he could press the gentlest possible kiss to her forehead. His lips were surprisingly soft, the touch so careful it was barely there at all. Welcome to Ember Ridge, Mrs. McCall, he murmured for her ears alone. As they turned to face the congregation, Clara caught sight of various expressions, shock, pity, curiosity, and on a few faces something that might have been envy. Jonas offered her his arm, and she took it, her small hand barely spanning his forearm. They walked back down the aisle together, and Clara held her head high despite the whispers that rose like a tide behind them. Outside, Jonas released a breath that seemed to come from his boots. That was unpleasant, he said. I apologize. They're not bad people, just human, Clara finished. Humans always stare at what they don't understand. Jonas studied her with those surprisingly gentle eyes. You speak from experience. Being the smallest woman in Boston society comes with its own share of stares, she admitted, though perhaps not quite like this. We make quite the pair, Jonas said, and for the first time there was a hint of humor in his voice. The giant and the fairy. I prefer to think of us as a study in contrasts, Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. Jonas's laugh was rusty, as if he didn't use it often. I like that, a study in contrasts. He gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby, modified, she noticed, with a step stool attached to the side. Ready to see your new home, home. The word sat strangely in her mouth. Her home had been the brownstone on Beacon Hill with its Persian rugs and crystal chandeliers. Her home had been her mother's rose garden and her father's library before the fever took them both. Her home had been anywhere but her uncle's house, with his wandering hands and whiskey breath. Yes, she said, because what else was there to say? She'd made her choice the moment she'd answered that advertisement, Rancher Seeks Bride. Must be hardy, honest, and unafraid of hard work. Appearance unimportant. If only Jonas had mentioned he was the size of a redwood, though she supposed she hadn't mentioned she was barely larger than a child herself. The wagon ride out of town took them through landscape that stole Clara's breath. The Wyoming territory stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of gold and green, beneath a sky so vast it made her dizzy. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants appropriate given her companion. Jonas handled the reins with the same careful grace he seemed to apply to everything, his massive hands gentle on the leather. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady clop of hooves. "You can ask," Jonas finally said. "Ask whatever you're thinking so hard about. Your face is like a book, every thought written clear as day." Clara considered denying it, then decided on honesty. "Why a mail-order bride? A man like you. Surely there were local women." Jonas's laugh was bitter this time. "A man like me? You mean a giant, a freak?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He sighed, the sound like wind through a canyon. "I tried courting local girls when I was younger, but even the bravest ones, they'd look at me and see something unnatural, something wrong. Can't say I blame them. When you're built like this, people assume things about your nature." "What kinds of things?" "That I'm violent, brutish, that I've got appetites to match my size." His knuckles whitened on the reins. "That I'd hurt anyone foolish enough to get close." Clara studied his profile, the strong jaw, the nose that had been broken at least once, the furrow between his brows that spoke of years of judgment. "Have you ever, hurt anyone?" Jonas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Once. I was 17, still growing into this body. A group of boys cornered my younger sister behind the schoolhouse. Their intentions weren't honorable. I pulled them off her." He flexed his right hand, staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. "Broke one boy's arm, another's ribs. Didn't mean to, just grabbed them, and I didn't know my own strength yet." "You were protecting your sister." "That's not how the town saw it. They saw a monster who nearly killed 2 boys. Never mind what those boys were trying to do. After that, parents would cross the street when they saw me coming, pull their daughters inside." He glanced at her. "So you see why I looked elsewhere for a bride. Figured a woman desperate enough to answer an advertisement might be desperate enough to overlook this." He gestured to himself. "And you figured a woman from Boston would be what, more refined, less likely to run screaming. I figured wrong, apparently. You looked ready to faint when you saw me." "I didn't faint." "No," he agreed, and that ghost of a smile returned. "You didn't. You stood your ground and told me you were exactly as large as you needed to be." He shook his head. "That took guts. Or foolishness. Maybe both. But out here, both qualities serve a person well." The ranch, when it came into view, took Clara's breath away for different reasons than the landscape. It was modest but well-maintained, with a 2-story house that looked like it had been built by someone who understood craftsmanship. The barn was huge, appropriately, so she supposed, and she could see cattle dotting the distant fields like scattered seeds. But what caught her attention were the modifications. A smaller set of steps ran parallel to the main porch stairs. Hooks at various heights on the porch pillars, windows set lower than usual in what must be the kitchen. Jonas followed her gaze. "I've been preparing," he admitted, "since your first letter, trying to make things accessible." "You built all this for me." "For us," he corrected. "A home should fit everyone who lives in it." Clara felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built between herself and hope. This giant, this man everyone feared, had spent weeks preparing for a bride he'd never met, trying to make her comfortable in a world built for someone his size. "It's wonderful," she said, meaning it. Jonas's entire face transformed when he truly smiled. Years fell away, revealing the boy he must have been before the world taught him to be ashamed of his size. "Wait until you see inside." He came around to help her down from the wagon, and that's when the reality of their size difference truly hit home. His hand spanned her entire waist, with room to spare. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, but set her down with infinite care, as if she were made of spun glass. I won't break, she said, though her voice shook slightly. I know, he said, but his hands lingered for a moment, steadying her. But I'd never forgive myself if I was careless, if I hurt you, even accidentally. You won't. You don't know that. You don't know how easy it would be for me to... He cut himself off, stepping back. Come, let me show you the house. The inside was a revelation. In the kitchen, he'd built a secondary counter at a lower height with steps that pulled out from the cabinets. The table had 2 chairs, one massive, one normal-sized. In what would be her bedroom, the furniture was perfectly scaled to her size, including a beautiful wooden wardrobe with carved wildflowers on the doors. You made all this? Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood. I'm good with my hands, Jonas said, then blushed furiously. That is woodworking. I meant woodworking. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. It's beautiful. Truly. I've never had furniture made just for me. You have your own room, Jonas said quickly. I know the marriage is legal, but I don't expect... That is, you don't have to... We can take time to know each other first. Relief and something else disappointment flooded through her. Thank you. Are you hungry? I've got stew on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it's filling. They ate together at the mismatched table, and Clara discovered that Jonas had modified more than furniture. He'd learned to cook from his mother, he told her, and the stew was rich and hearty, full of vegetables from his own garden. Tell me about Boston, he said, seeming genuinely interested. So she did. She told him about the society parties she'd hated, the books she'd loved, the way the Charles River looked in autumn. She told him about losing her parents to scarlet fever, about moving in with her uncle, though she kept the darkest parts of that story locked away. She told him about seeing the advertisement in the newspaper and feeling for the first time in months like she had a choice. What made you place the advertisement? She asked in return. Jonas pushed his empty bowl away, considering. Loneliness, he said simply. Gets so quiet out here sometimes I forget what my own voice sounds like. And there's something about sharing a life with someone. My parents had that. Even when times were hard, they had each other. I wanted that, want that. But why someone sight unseen? Why not at least exchange photographs? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think a photograph of me would have brought women running? Besides, I figured if we wrote enough letters, got to know each other's minds and hearts first, maybe the rest wouldn't matter so much. He met her eyes. Was I wrong? Clara thought about the letters they'd exchanged over 3 months. Jonas wrote with unexpected eloquence about books he'd read, his dreams for the ranch, his observations about the land and sky. His letters had revealed a thoughtful, educated mind trapped in a body the world feared. No, she said softly. You weren't wrong. That night alone in her specially built room, Clara sat on her perfectly sized bed and tried to make sense of her situation. She was married to a giant, there was no other word for it. A man who could crush her without effort, who took up entire doorways, whose mere presence made grown men step aside. But he was also the man who'd built her furniture with flowers carved in the wood, who cooked with surprising skill, who quoted poetry in his letters and handled horses like they were extensions of his own body. A knock at her door made her jump. Clara, I brought you some extra blankets. Nights get cold here. She opened the door to find Jonas holding a stack of quilts handmade by the look of them. He had to duck to fit under the doorframe, and once again the sheer impossibility of their situation struck her.